main speed cubes of 2022. So at this point in time, I actually have quite a bunch of not so commonly seen setups in my entire line of mains. And in fact, my entire lineup of 3x3 to 7x7s has changed, either to totally new cubes or modification of a cube that I already own. So starting with the 10x10, this is the same cube as before. This is a Mei Long 10 that has been magnetized, and this is the ultimate non-WCA big cube. It's super fast, super stable, super light for its size, rarely ever gets a pop or deforming lockup. And with the magnets, it makes transition from one turn to another a breeze, and even the reverse corner cutting is on point. So when it comes to cubes of this size, it's no longer visibly misaligning the cube and watching it snap back in place. It's just a matter of if the cube looks perfectly aligned, whether it can turn, because there are some brands where the pieces are so square that even if it looks totally aligned like that, there's actually some catching going on. But with the Mei Long 10, it's sufficiently round such that it won't have such catches. For 9x9, although I use a Qi 9x9 for this relay, I actually don't own it. I actually just borrowed it. And my main 9x9 is still the Yixing Huanglong because it's the only 9x9 I own. And at this point, it's 4 generations outdated. With the MF Mei Long Qi and Diansheng 9x9 is also bigger than my 10x10. Just made in an older era without the more modern technology to manufacture everything in a smaller size. And I'll probably get a Diansheng 9x9 at some point. For 8x8, I use an MF8. It's magnetic spring swap with the Yixing Unicorn King 4x4 springs. And this cube has been in my lineup for the past 3 years, and it still performs better than quite a lot of the newer models out of the box. So even though the newer model may have a higher potential, buying it would mean that I have to do the entire setup that I did to my MF8 all over again in order for that cube to actually beat my MF8. So I never really switched from this one. But at some point in time, I also do foresee this being superseded by the Diansheng. I generally just foresee the Diansheng 8x8 as like being in the same tier as the Haze 7, the Outfu GTS, or the Spark 7x7s. And it would make the MF8 looks like it belongs to the Uzi and Huanglong 7 tier in comparison. For 7x7, it's between the Spark and the Outfu GTS, but more of the Spark. So I do find that the Spark is a more stable and reliable cube, and it's also lighter and smaller, so it's the more go-to option if I'm having a bad day or feeling more tired. And like generally, I think this cube holds up much better against sloppy turning, and it also takes less effort to hold, and therefore I can last longer in a session without being tired out. The Outfu, on the other hand, has its speed going for it. Like it turns at an extremely high speed with almost no friction. It's just way faster than my Spark, even though I spring compress my Spark to speed this thing up much more than what it used to be out of the box. And the Outfu is also just the hardest big cube to ever pop or get a deforming lockup on. But then, thanks to the spring compression I've done to the Spark, I've also managed to tighten this cube much more than the stock tension, and it's pretty much impossible for pieces to pop out, and I also rarely get deforming lockups on this thing. The main downside to the Outfu is that it's just big, which is also why I don't really want to use the MGC7 because it's the same size, and the Outfu is also heavy, which is the other downside. Even though I technically count the Spark as my main, there are some times where I just prefer to use the Outfu, and there are also some times where I'll just do a session where I use both of these cubes. For 6x6, I use an Outshi GTS with a magnetic core. The core only has 4 magnets, which is unlike the standard, which has 8, and then there are 8 magnets in the corner. And this is also a super fast cube, thanks to having fewer core magnets, so I do think the slowdown by the core magnet is not as great as a full 16 magnet scheme. Even then, the stability of this cube is still quite decent. So this cube has been my main since 2018, and I switched to the MGC 6x6 when it first came out in 2020, and that was all before I core magnetized it. Because after I core magnetized this cube, I find that the performance more or less caught up, and I ended up switching back to this. I don't think it's really better than the MGC 6. I actually get the same performance with both of them. I just prefer the feel of the Outshi because like, the MGC magnets are stronger, which as a plus side, it makes the cube more stable, but as a minus, it produces a more prominent snapping feel, which I don't enjoy. And I just find that Outshi is just a whole lot smoother, and it's also harder to pop. For 5x5, I use an Angstrom WR with a magnetic core. So this has a 16 magnet scheme identical to the original Gun 11M, which is the first cube to implement core corner magnetization. And generally, I prefer the Angstrom over the Valk 5 and the MGC 5 for the same reason as the 6x6, which is the magnets are just weaker, so it feels smoother overall. But at the same time, due to the weaker magnets, the stock Angstrom is slightly on the unstable side. And even then, I still manage to pull off faster averages on the stock Angstrom compared to both the Valk 5 and the MGC 5. but core magnets add a further upgrade. So this cube is just a lot more stable than before. It has also slowed down by quite a lot. In fact, now it's slightly slower than my Block 5 as well. So core magnets are not necessarily a pure upgrade. It's more of a mixed give and take, because like the speed is sacrificed but the stability is upgraded. But overall, I still think it's still an upgrade, because with better stability, it holds up better with competition nerves. And I do think that implementing my Ultra GTS's 12 magnet scheme into a brand new Angstrom WR might actually yield a better result than my current Angstrom WR right now. But I don't intend to change my main. I just think that that is a potential idea to create a premium product maybe in the future. For 4x4, I use a Meilong 4x4. This is not the same cube that I've been using earlier in 2021 and probably in 2020 if I remember correctly. The other cube is a black Meilong with super strong magnets. I personally think that this one is way too strong for my liking, and I eventually switched to a factory magnetized stickerless Meilong, which has much weaker magnets and overall just a lot better. The cube is also polished to get rid of the frosted finish that a Meilong usually would have, and just like my old Meilong 4x4, it's also lubed with the Angstrom loops. This is just the second lightest 4x4 that I know of, coming in only at 109 grams, which is just 3 grams more than the X-Men Ambition. And it accommodates a very similar turning style to the Ambition, and that allows you to turn very fast and very light with very little effort in each turn, but it comes with the prerequisite that you can turn accurately. And overall, I still think that the MGC 4x4 and the Ulsu WR are a bit more reliable, and more people would prefer them as compared to the Meilong and the Ambition, but I do prefer the lighter turning overall. And even compared between the Meilong and the Ambition itself, I do prefer the Meilong, because like it's actually still a bit more stable, a bit faster and less catchy than the actual X-Men Ambition, and it's also 59mm, which I prefer over 60. For 3x3, I use a Meilong that is set up exactly the same as my 4x4, which is to polish it and then Angstrom lube it. And this cube feels like a gun 3x3, and the size is smaller than 56mm, both of which are features that I'm not really the biggest fan of, but I set all my PBs on this cube. Even got a 9.75 single at one point. For 2x2, I use a Tangpo. It's a non-magnetic cube. It's more or less an outdated model, but even then I have no problems with this cube, and I also don't do 2x2 that much, so I have no intention to switch from this one.